What in Silicon Valley we call hacking, it is something that you could also call systems thinking. And this is what attracted me to come here to Roosevelt School. And it's the idea that what we do as human beings, we interact with each other, we interact with our environment, and the environment interacts with us. So it's a system, and the way we teach our kids, and the way we treat our kids at home, and what we feed them, and what they do, all interact. And I'm fortunate to have been trained in systems thinking, both educationally and just growing up in a family full of engineers, where I've learned to think of myself as a system, to the point that the guy who started presenting tonight is not the same guy presenting now, because, well, it's invisible to us because of the time frame we have. I actually shed a whole bunch of skin cells, and I built new ones. And some of my blood cells died, and they're going into my liver, and new ones are being formed. And the new ones are being formed out of what I just ate. So it turns out that what we put into our bodies has actually a very important effect on what we're made of. And what we're made of affects how we think and how we behave and how we act. You can also do careful correlation over time. If you just sort of say, how am I doing today? That's a good data point. But how am I doing today versus yesterday versus the day before versus last year? And you can look at data, and you can also just look at, how do I feel? In fact, writing down every morning, how do I feel? You might be amazed to find out that how you feel changes on a monthly basis. On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied am I today, in general? Things like that can really give you self-awareness, and when we teach self-awareness to our kids or to ourselves, then you start asking the most important question any student will ever ask, which is why, because that's the fundamental part of learning. Real-time feedback is also something that wasn't that easy to do even 10 years ago. Now it's getting much easier. We can use really cool devices to know how we're doing right now. Here's an example, $40 piece of technology. It's a pulse oximeter. It tells you the percentage of oxygen in your blood and graphs your heart rate for you. So this is pretty neat because I can tell what is my oxygen levels. In fact, I just gave a talk about what your oxygen levels do on an airplane because I wanted to know why did I pass out in that aisle after that 20-hour flight to China. And I figured it out. The thing is though, you give this data to a curious child and you say, this is what your body's doing right now, did you know? Maybe math becomes interesting because now you actually have control. Can you lower your heart rate? Yes, you can. Can you change the way it beats? Yes, you can. What does the graph look like when you change that? Why did you change that? You might not choose to tell them that by changing the spacing between their heartbeats, they can turn off their reptile brain stress response and that they'll be calmer and more focused in class. I also learned, and I've actually interviewed experts on my podcast about this, you can teach yourself to sleep more efficiently. You can get more REM sleep in less amount of time. You can get more deep sleep in less time. And when you do this, you gain hours. So I really do need about 5 hours of sleep a night. I fly about 100 times a year. Last week I was in Singapore giving a talk based on these same general principles to a group of investment bankers. And then the next day I gave a talk about computer security to a bunch of computer security experts. And then flew back and came here right away. And that sort of thing I've learned over time to get my sleep to the point where I'm very, very functional on 5 hours. And this is something that I encourage kids and adults and everyone else to do. And it's a little algorithm. The first part of it is try what should work. And there, in the case of, say, losing weight for me, I ate less, I worked out more. But the data didn't show that it worked. So at first I said, oh, I'm just not trying hard enough. But wait, I weighed what was on my plate. I'm pretty sure that that's what I ate. And I'm pretty sure I worked out this much. Like, how come this isn't working? And when things don't work, you can ignore them and say, that is not good data. It's not good data for me, or maybe it's just not good data in general. And then you try the things that maybe shouldn't work, but might, because what the heck else? The nature of scientific inquiry is to do that. And also, if you're dealing with something like obesity or heart disease or something else, it's sort of a matter of survival. You have a very strong interest in doing this. So what did I do? I did a lot of weird stuff. I went to Ecuador and I consulted with a shaman. Said, what do I have to learn from you? It was interesting. This is Barbara Van Dyson. She runs a retreat that's not so far away from here, about an hour away, in a small town whose name I can't pronounce. And Barbara is the head of the American Pre- and Perinatal Psychology Association. And when I walked in to meet her, She said, tell me about your birth. I'm, what do you mean your birth? What are you talking about? And I said, I had the cord wrapped around my neck. She goes, oh, I have the PowerPoint slide for you. And she puts up a PowerPoint slide and describes my personality in intimate detail. I'm like, how did you do that? How is that possible? And she said, well, for the past 30 years I've been studying how the effect of trauma on children affects their stages of adult development. And I ended up spending 10 days there working with Barbara and getting an understanding of basically where my own stress came from and why I, as a normal human being, feel normal desires, for instance, to improve myself and things like that. So I found out, largely from her teachings, that there's an enormous amount of influence that you have on very young children, and it actually decreases in time as kids get older and older. So the most important thing that we can do is teach our very young children things like kindness and things like being kind to themselves and to others, and also giving them the nutrients and the food and the nurturing environment that they need, because stress matters to those kids as much as it does to us. And if they don't have proper building blocks, that is a stressor on kids. If they don't have the fats they need, they don't have the micronutrients they need, they don't make healthy brains. And it's in our best interest to have our kids make healthy brains so that when we're old, they'll be nice to us. I also went to Tibet and spent some time at a Buddhist monastery and climbed up to the base of Mount Kailash, which is the headwater of the Ganges River. And I tell you, if you want to know a society that spends 10,000 years looking at what their brains do, that would be the people in remote Buddhist monasteries who can sit there, wrap themselves in a wet sheet in an ice storm, and then somehow dry the sheet off with their body temperature. They have some pretty cool skills. I'm really interested in knowing about the basic underpinnings that oftentimes mirror Western psychology there. So I spent some time studying this. I learned yoga. Turns out, if you know how to control your body, you're much better at controlling the state of your mind, and you can do things you couldn't do before. And this is a local thing I did. I decided what would happen if I wanted to deal with being alone for a while. So I spent 4 days fasting in a cave outside Sedona, by myself in the middle of the national forest. After 4 days, walked out. And that was an interesting experience as well, but it turns out it's very hard, especially for young people or adults. It's very hard to spend the time it takes to have an internal focus because there's so many distractions that happen. It's also very hard to have an internal focus if you just ate a breakfast full of MSG because it will make your brain act differently. It's actually an excitatory neurotoxin, we call it. And the reason that happens with MSG is that it causes your basically causes your brain cells to keep firing because there's excess glutamate if you don't have a particularly intact blood-brain barrier, which is common when you're young. So whether it's a nutritional thing or whether it's just the fact that we have distractions in TV and family stress and school stress and all these things around us all the time, it's pretty difficult for us to pay attention. And this is one of the ways that I worked on paying attention to myself so that I could figure out what are the areas where I can improve even more.